The wind coming off Lake Michigan was sharp enough to sting, rattling the tall glass panes of the Wellington International headquarters. Inside, the boardroom glowed with the warm light of recessed fixtures, its polished walnut table set for the morning's meeting. Marcus Wellington stood at the window, his reflection crisp against the pale skyline. He had slept little, the echoes of last night's investor confrontation still bouncing in his mind. But there was no time to dwell. Today was bigger and more dangerous in its own way. A visiting Middle Eastern delegation was prepared to sign a deal worth billions, the kind of agreement that could secure his company's future for the next decade. And it would all unravel if even a single word was misunderstood. The clock's hands inched toward 9. Marcus adjusted his tie, his jaw tight. His translator, Nadim, had been briefed for weeks, every nuance, every cultural layer accounted for. He glanced at the doorway, expecting to see Nadim stride in with his usual calm efficiency. Instead, the door burst open to a flurry of motion. Two assistants half-carried, half-dragged a pail, sweating Nadim into the room. His lips were colorless, his eyes unfocused. "Sir," one assistant panted. He collapsed in the hallway. "Paramedics are on their way." He can't speak. The air seemed to thin. Marcus's mind ran cold calculations. No. Translator. No negotiation. No deal. Billions at stake. The delegation was already in the elevator, their security detail seconds away from ushering them in. His team scrambled, calling agencies, searching for anyone qualified within a 10-mile radius. The earliest they could find someone was in 3 hours. He had 3 minutes. Beyond the open boardroom door, a quiet figure moved unnoticed in the hallway. A young woman in navy coveralls knelt beside a pail, methodically polishing the marble floor. Stray wisps of dark hair fell over her cheek. Her sleeves rolled to her elbows. Beside her, an older man wiped down the baseboards, his weathered hands careful, deliberate. Marcus barely registered them in his world. People in uniforms often became part of the background. But as he barked instructions into his phone, his gaze flickered back. The girl had paused mid-wipe, her head tilted, eyes sharp, not curious, but listening, really listening. "Hannah," the older man murmured, his accent lilting, "the East Corridor next." She rose gracefully, pushing the cart forward. Marcus noticed the name stitched above her pocket. Hannah. Her father, Yusef, he recognized. From the maintenance logs, a quiet presence in the building for years. As Marcus turned back to the chaos, a voice soft but clear cut through the noise. "Sir, if you need Arabic, I can help." For a moment, the room stilled. She stood just inside the doorway now, hands clasped in front of her, eyes steady despite the flush in her cheeks. The board members exchanged looks, some incredulous, others skeptical. "You?" one of them asked, his tone bordering on disbelief. She nodded once, without flinching. "I grew up speaking both Arabic and English. My father taught me. I can translate." Marcus studied her for a beat too long. She couldn't have been more than 19. The uniform, the cleaning carpet, didn't fit. But there was something in her gaze, a quiet self-assurance that didn't waver under the weight of a billion-dollar gamble. Outside, the delegation's footsteps echoed closer. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing against his ribs. "Mr. Wellington," Yusef said from the doorway, his voice low but firm, "my daughter does not speak carelessly. If she says she can do it, she can do it." The tension in Marcus's jaw eased by a fraction. He had built an empire on taking calculated risks. This, though, wasn't just calculated, it was desperate. Still, when Hannah stepped forward, he saw no trace of panic in her, only readiness. "All right," Marcus said finally, his voice clipped but decisive. "You're on." In the seconds before the door swung open to reveal the delegation, Marcus felt an unfamiliar flicker in his chest, not confidence, not relief, curiosity. He had no idea that the quiet janitor's daughter would not only save the meeting, but also pull threads that would unravel far more than a business deal. The delegation's arrival was like the opening of a stage curtain, every sound amplified, every movement scrutinized. Dark wool coats, polished leather shoes, the faint aroma of spiced coffee clinging to the air. The men and women from Riyadh stepped into the boardroom with the quiet gravity of people accustomed to moving the world's levers. Marcus rose to greet them, forcing calm into his voice while his heart hammered. Hannah stood a step behind him, her hands folded neatly at her waist. From the corner of his vision, Marcus caught a glimpse of her profile, steady, unflinching. though he could see the pulse at her throat beating quick. For a 19-year-old who had been cleaning baseboards minutes ago, she looked as though she had been born for this. The first exchange was simple. Ceremonial greetings, Hannah translated with ease, her Arabic rolling from her tongue in a warm, confident cadence. The delegation leader, Sheikh Omar Al-Karim, tilted his head, appraising her with a flicker of intrigue. Marcus noticed this was not a man easily impressed, but the room was still taut with danger. This deal was not merely about trade, it was about trust. The delegation had already rejected the other American firms for perceived arrogance. One wrong inflection here could shift the balance against Marcus's company. Midway through the formalities, a question from one of the delegates took on a sharper edge. Marcus recognized the word provision in Arabic, but missed the rest. Hannah's brows knit for a fraction of a second before she delivered the translation. He is asking if your company is willing to commit to quarterly audits conducted by their own appointed team, without prior notice. It was a risk-laden request one Marcus would never have agreed to under other circumstances. But he saw how carefully Hannah had handled it, giving him both the literal meaning and the implicit challenge in the delegate's tone. Tell him, Marcus said slowly, that transparency is the foundation of any partnership I value. We will agree to his request in principle, provided his team observes U.S. corporate law. Hannah's voice softened as she relayed this in Arabic, adjusting tone and phrasing so it sounded less like a counterstrike and more like a respectful concession. The delegate's shoulders eased. Marcus felt the first small thread of tension unwind. During the short break that followed, Hannah stepped aside to pour herself water. That's when Marcus caught the first ripple beneath the surface. Vanessa, his fiancée, flawless in a crimson-sheath dress, and diamonds, leaned in toward one of the younger aides in the delegation. Her voice was low, almost conspiratorial, but the shift in Hannah's posture was instant. The girl froze, her gaze locked on them, listening with a focus Marcus had seen in war veterans before battle. When the aide glanced up and spotted Hannah watching, he stiffened. Vanessa turned, her smile quick but brittle. Hannah said nothing, only returned to her place at Marcus's side, her expression unreadable. The second half of the meeting was even more treacherous. Figures were discussed, clauses weighed. At one point, a phrase passed between the delegates so quickly Marcus almost missed it. Hannah didn't. She leaned slightly toward him and murmured under her breath, "They are testing you, saying they doubt your sincerity." Marcus responded with a measured statement about the years his company had invested in building relationships across the Middle East. Hannah's delivery of his words was not just precise, it was alive with conviction. The temperature in the room shifted. By the time the delegation rose to leave, the outlines of the deal were taking shape. Sheikh Omar clasped Marcus's hand in both of his, a rare sign of favor. Hannah offered a traditional farewell in Arabic that earned her a nod of genuine respect. When the heavy boardroom doors closed behind them, Marcus turned to thank her. But Hannah's eyes weren't on him. They were fixed on the far corner of the room, where Vanessa was speaking quickly into her phone in Arabic. At this time, Marcus saw the flicker of alarm in Hannah's face. Vanessa's voice was quick and low, but Hannah caught every syllable. The words slid in Arabic like polished stones, harmless in sound to anyone who didn't know the language, but the meaning struck like a blade. Offshore accounts, payment delivery. Once the ink is dry, Hannah's knuckles widened around the translation folder she still carried. Marcus was shaking hands with his CFO, unaware, his attention still tethered to the just completed meeting. She knew she could walk away right now, pretend she'd heard nothing. She was the janitor's daughter. This wasn't her world. But her father's voice came back to her. One of the few constants in her life. If you see a snake in the grass, child, you don't wait for someone else to step on it. She moved closer, slow, deliberate, staying within the shadow of a half-drawn curtain as Vanessa ended her call and swept toward the private lounge. Hannah followed, careful to keep her footsteps silent on the carpet. Inside, Vanessa poured herself champagne with the ease of someone who never worried about spilling anything worth more than her week's pay. She was smiling to herself, tapping out a message on her phone also in Arabic. Hannah, reading over the reflection in the glass wall, felt a twist in her stomach. This wasn't idle gossip. This was coordination. Vanessa was tying herself to someone on the delegation side. Marcus entered then, catching Hannah's sudden stiffness. "Everything all right?" he asked in a low voice. Hannah's eyes met his steady, but burning with something he couldn't quite name. "I need to speak with you privately," she said in the adjoining conference room. She laid it out in English, her voice stripped of hesitation. "Your fiancé is discussing payments with one of their aides. Not for the deal, something personal. Offshore accounts, arrangements after the contract signs." Marcus felt his pulse spike. "You're certain?" Hannah's gaze didn't waver. "I know what I heard. Twice." He wanted to push back, to dismiss it as a misunderstanding. But there was no tremor in her voice, no glimmer of doubt in her eyes, and hadn't he felt a small, nagging unease around Vanessa before? Still, the idea of a public scene was unthinkable. "Say nothing for now," he told her. "But if you hear anything else..." The next round of talks began, the air thicker now. Heavy with undercurrents Marcus could almost feel sliding between the players. Hannah stood a fraction closer to him this time, listening not just to the formal exchanges, but to every whisper on the edges. Midway through, the aide in question leaned to Vanessa and spoke quickly in Arabic. Hannah didn't even blink. In her calm, professional tone, she translated aloud for Marcus and the room, her English words dropping like stones into a still pond. "He says the funds will be moved within 48 hours of the signing, and her portion will be waiting in Dubai." The silence was instant. Every eye turned to Vanessa, who froze, color draining from her face. And Marcus felt the floor under this meeting shift, not from the deal, but from the fault line opening. In his personal life, one Hannah had just exposed to daylight. The boardroom felt like a vault with all the oxygen drained out. Nobody moved. The only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioning, a thin, metallic whisper that seemed louder than the pounding in Marcus's ears. Vanessa's eyes darted from Marcus to the delegates and back. Again, her smile returned thin, brittle, but it couldn't hide the flush creeping up her neck. "She's mistaken," Vanessa said in perfect English, each syllable clipped. "This child is twisting things. It's absurd." Before Marcus could respond, a deeper, steadier voice rose from the doorway. "Yusuf." His hands were clasped behind his back, his eyes fixed on Vanessa with the calm of someone who'd seen storms far worse than this. "I also speak Arabic," he said quietly, "and I heard every word. My daughter speaks the truth." The shift in the room was seismic. Delegates leaned forward. A few exchanged murmured phrases in their own language, words Hannah caught on her. Integrity, deception. Sheikh Omar's gaze locked on Vanessa, his face unreadable. But the stillness in him was dangerous. Marcus felt 100 calculations flash through his mind: shareholder fallout, PR catastrophes, the personal betrayal. But before he could speak, Omar addressed Hannah directly in Arabic, his tone formal. "You serve your father well, and your employer, too. Truth is the most precious currency in any deal." She replied in the same language, her voice low and steady. "I only did what was right." The exchange seemed to carry more weight than Marcus could fully grasp. But he knew enough to read the respect in Omar's nod. Vanessa stood abruptly, her chair screeching against the floor. "This is a setup," she snapped. "You can't." "Possibly," Marcus cut her off with a single, measured sentence. "Leave your key card with security." Her lips parted as if to protest, but the look in his eyes stopped her cold. The diamond on her hand caught the light as she yanked it off and set it on the table. The sound sharpened the heavy air. Then she was gone, heels clicking down the hallway in a retreat that felt less like an exit and more like a surrender. The meeting didn't end there. If anything, the stakes rose. Omar signaled to one of his aides, who placed a slim, leather-bound folder on the table. Inside was a revised draft of the contract, clean, but more binding than before, each clause a test of trust. Marcus signed, his pen steady. Hannah translated the ceremonial close, her voice carrying the weight of a deal saved from the brink. When the last handshake was done, Omar lingered by Yusuf. "You taught her well," he said in Arabic. Yusuf's smile was faint, but proud. "She teaches me now." As the delegation departed, Marcus stood in the quiet they left behind, watching Hannah help her father gather his cleaning supplies. She didn't look like the girl he'd seen polishing floors that morning. She looked like someone who had just shifted the trajectory of his company and perhaps his life. What Marcus didn't know, not yet, was that the real aftershock of this day was still coming. Something buried in Yusuf's past, something tied to a woman Marcus once knew, was about to surface, and when it did, it would shake far more than his business. The building exhaled when the delegation's cars slipped into traffic, and the doors settled back into their frames. The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was the charged stillness after lightning. On the 38th floor, staff spoke, in softer voices, as if any loud sound might shatter something delicate and important. Marcus stood by the long window with the lake-like sheet metal beyond the glass, phone in his palm. 8 messages waiting. He was not reading them. He was looking at Hannah, who was in the corridor with her father, tying a thin piece of twine around a torn flap on their supplies box, movement small and careful, like she was trying not to wake a sleeping room. He crossed to them with a directness that made assistants scatter. "You saved the deal," he said, and he meant it the way a man means water after a long walk in the desert. Hannah dipped her head, but her gaze held. "You did the work," she said. "I only made sure your words landed where you aimed them." Yusuf's eyes warmed at that pride. Yes, but something else too, a quiet warning that pride is a seed that must be watered with humility or it grows wild. "Come up," Marcus said. 28th floor lounge, please." He didn't ask. He invited like a man rearranging the furniture of his life and making room for 2 new chairs. In the lounge, the world softened. Tall palms and white pots, a long couch the color of good coffee, a quiet fire behind glass. Maria from catering brought tea on instinct even though this was an office, not a home. Hannah cupped the mug, fingers grateful for heat, and looked around as if the room had held its breath for her arrival. "I can't pay you enough thanks today," Marcus said, "but I can try to do it tomorrow and the day after and the day after." That, he slid a small card across the table and a mail already drafted to HR. A scholarship application, a mentorship slot in international strategy, a bridge from a mop bucket to a department with windows. "It's yours," he said, "if you want it." Hannah's eyes flickered to her father before she said anything. Yusuf watched her face as if reading a poem he knew by heart. "We clean," Hannah said finally, almost apologetic. "It is honest work. This is different." Her voice tightened around the last word, like a knot in thread. "Different doesn't mean wrong," Marcus said, gentler. "Different is the first step to anywhere you haven't been yet." A soft buzz against his wrist security's text arriving. He glanced down. Attempted remote login from former credential. Vanessa L. His throat clicked. Another message stacked under it. Service entrance camera. The aide from the delegation, 12:07 p.m. Speaking to an unidentified driver. The storm hadn't left. It had simply circled around to gather weight. "Mr. Wellington." The voice at the door was small and familiar. The building's bus driver. Mr. Nolan, the one who ran the morning shuttle for staff, who couldn't afford the train. The one with a paper cup of bad coffee and stories about the bears. He stood in the doorway, cap in hand. "Sorry to intrude. I was asked to wait for Miss Vanessa's courier, but I saw something on my run. Thought you should know. There was a silver card by the service ramp an hour ago." Same man from the meeting. Gave cash to the guard who never takes a tip. He looked at Hannah, then back to Marcus. Felt wrong. "Thank you," Marcus said. And he meant that too, deep and sincere. When Mr. Nolan left, Yusuf wordlessly slid the lounge's side door closed, sounds from the hallway thinned to a hush. He sat forward, hands laced, eyes on a point in the middle distance where old memories live. "In my country," he said softly, "we say, truth rides on the smallest words. If you listen for them, you will not be cheated." Hannah's mouth curled, a small, almost private smile. She'd grown up on that sentence. Anyone could see it. Marcus felt a prickle run up his spine, not fear recognition. He had heard that line once in a sunlit classroom, long before the company had glass walls and his name on the building. A woman had taught it to him with chalk on a green board, and warmth in her voice. She had written it in Arabic, then in English, then back again until it felt like a song. He hadn't thought of her in years. "Where did you learn that?" he asked before he could stop himself. Yusuf's eyes flickered, the tiniest shutter opening and closing from a good teacher. He said, "From my wife." The room shifted. The look on Hannah's face changed, softened at the edges. "My mother," she said, touching a pendant that hung low and quiet against her collarbone, then silver leaf worn smooth by years of nervous fingers. She taught languages to anyone who wanted to cross between hearts. The pendant caught the light. Marcus had given one like it once, as a clumsy thank you to a woman who had made Arabic feel less like a wall and more like a door. A cedar leaf, the exact curve, the exact notch. The breath leaked out of him in a slow, astonished echo before he could reach for that thread. Maria from catering reappeared with a plate of lemon cookies and an apology about the frosting. The spell broke. Phones breathed again. The fire ticked. In the window, a gull hung briefly on the wind and then knifed away. Something else, Hannah said. Voice low. She slid her phone across the table. On the screen, a new message glowed in Arabic. Leave languages that are not yours. Stay in your place. No name, no number that made sense. A narrow, mean sentence pretending to be a warning but smelling like a threat. Marcus didn't ask if she was scared. He felt the fear himself, cold and salty at the back of his throat. A taste he remembered from nights he thought would never end. It's cowardice, he said, ugly and small. It always uses messages because it does not have the courage to use a face. He looked at Yusef. May I keep that screenshot? Yusef nodded once. We keep copies of everything, he said. That is how truth stays heavy. Security pinged again. Ex-fiancé attempted badge clone fails. Email filters block 3 outbound archives. 8 is on a watch list for financial crimes in 2 jurisdictions. The ground under the morning hardened into something like ice. Marcus stood. He moved the way people move when they decide to climb a hill even if it is sleeting. And the path is mud. All right, he said. We handle this. Properly, he told Hannah. Finish your day, but do not travel alone. Use the shuttle. Take Mr. Nolan's last run. I'll have someone ride with you, Yusef. I'd like a copy of your schedules for the week. No more surprise overtime. Yusef's look said he lived along to believe in perfect safety. But he accepted the move all the same. I'd have something for you, he said then, as if the thought was nothing, as if he were offering a spare napkin. From his jacket, he drew a small envelope, old paper brown at the edges and softened by time. He placed it on the table and slid it across. My wife kept things she thought were beautiful. Pictures, lines from books, a letter from a student once. A thank you with clumsy Arabic and careful English. She made me keep this one when we left home, she said. One day, it will find the person it is meant for. Marcus's hand hovered over the envelope, not touching. He knew already what the paper would feel like, thin, almost brittle. The way paper gets when it is folded and unfolded over years. He knew the way his own small handwriting would look, younger, hopeful, promising to do good work with a new language. He didn't open it. Not yet. He didn't want to break it open and spill the past onto a floor that was already slippery with the present. Instead, he looked up. What was her name? He asked. His voice wasn't steady. Layla, Yusef said. He didn't add a last name. Sometimes one name carries the whole story. Hannah rose then, as if the conversation had reached a place where standing was a way to honor it. She slipped the pendant back inside her collar and picked up the cleaning box with the tied flap. We should go, she said. There are floors that do not care about billion-dollar deals. They still need to shine. On their way out, they passed the south hallway where the lights always flickered. A man stood at the window, silhouette sharp against the glass. He turned as they approached. It was the young E from the delegation, alone now. No coat, no briefcase, only his hands in his pockets and a bitterness that reached the eyes. He nodded at Hannah without warmth. In Arabic, very soft, he murmured, "You should have kept your mouth closed." Hannah didn't stop. She didn't lower her gaze. In the same language, with the even calm she used in the boardroom, she answered, "I was not taught to close my mouth around poison." Marcus watched the exchange from the lounge doorway, his body already moving before his mind formed the plan. Security would walk the 8 out. Legal would draft letters with teeth. It would comb every server file as if brushing a child's hair after the wind. But the envelope in his pocket felt heavier than any of it, the shape of the cedar leaf under. Hannah's blouse burned in his mind like a small sun. That night, when the building was an empty shell and the lake threw knife-cold air at the glass, he sat alone in his office and opened the envelope. The letter inside was short, written in his own hand, with a sentence underlined twice. Truth rides on the smallest words. Thank you for teaching me to listen. Beneath it, a faint smudge, maybe a thumbprint, maybe a teardrop made a pale moon. On the page, on the back, a date, 19 years ago to the day. He closed his eyes and saw a classroom bathed in warm light. He saw a woman with a silver leaf at her throat. He saw a girl today who carried the same leaf and the same sentence in her mouth like a prayer. Down on the street, a silver car idled and then slid into the night. Somewhere in the maze of the city, a number was dialed, a plan adjusted, a price raised. The story that had started with a lost translator was no longer about language. It was about inheritance of words, of courage, of debts unpaid, and the hard promise a man makes when he realizes the past has stepped into his present, and sat down across the table, asking in a voice he cannot ignore, "Did you do everything you could?" Night settled over the city like a sheet of black glass, reflecting only the brightest points of light. Marcus's office was one of them, still lit, though most of the building had emptied hours ago. Outside, the wind hurled itself against the windows, but inside, the silence was taut, almost brittle. The letter from Layla sat open on the desk beside a half-finished tumbler of whiskey, and Marcus's gaze kept drifting to it like a compass needle finding north. The elevator dinged. At this hour, it was a sound that carried weight. He turned, expecting security, but instead it was Hannah, her cheeks touched with cold. A knit scarf wound loosely at her neck. "I thought you'd gone home," he said. "I did," she replied, stepping inside. "Then Mr. Nolan called. Someone followed the shuttle tonight. Same silver car." Her voice was steady, but the shadows under her eyes told another story. Marcus's hand went to the phone. "Security. They've been told," Hannah said, stopping him. "But there's more. My father, he asked me to give you this." She set a small, battered cassette tape on his desk. "He said you should listen before you decide what to do next." Marcus frowned. It looked decades old, the kind that could barely survive one more play. "What's on it?" "I don't know," Hannah admitted. "But I think it's why my mother kept your letter all these years." He dug an old player from a cabinet, one he hadn't touched since they digitized the archives, and slid the cassette in. The tape hissed. Then a voice filled the room. Layla's voice, rich, clear, and speaking Arabic in measured sentences, a classroom exercise about trust, loyalty, and the price of silence. Then, a second voicemail, unfamiliar, slipped in. It was no lesson. It was a conversation, tense and hurried, about a shipment, a payment, and a list of names. Some of those names Marcus recognized from today's meeting. The recording ended abruptly, as if someone had yanked the mic away. Marcus looked at Hannah, who was watching him closely. "Where did your father get this?" "He says he found it in my mother's things after she died. He also says it was recorded in the same year. She left our country right after she stopped teaching." A quiet knock at the door broke the moment. It was Yusuf, his face drawn tighter than Marcus had seen it all day. "The man from the delegation security team is downstairs," he said in a low voice. "He wants to speak to you, alone." Marcus glanced at Hannah. "You stay here," he ordered, but her expression told him she had no intention of being sidelined. Downstairs, the lobby was lit only by the glow of the security desk. The man was waiting, coat collar up, eyes sharp. He didn't sit when Marcus approached. "You are in possession of something that does not belong to you," he said in precise English. "Give it to me, and the rest of this will disappear." "And if I don't?" Marcus asked. The man's smile was thin. "Then your translator's daughter will find life here very uncomfortable." Marcus didn't flinch, but he felt the weight of the envelope in his pocket, the tape in his office upstairs, and the cold certainty that this wasn't just about corporate sabotage anymore. It was about something older, deeper, and far more dangerous. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only the man could hear. "You've mistaken me for someone who plays defense. That's your first mistake. Your second was threatening someone under my protection." The man's eyes narrowed. "And the third," Marcus allowed himself the faintest smile. "That hasn't happened yet, but it will." As the man left, melting into the dark outside, Marcus knew the game had shifted again. It was no longer a matter of keeping the deal intact. It was about unraveling a network that had touched both his past and Hannah's family long before they'd ever met. And somewhere, hidden in that tangle, was the reason Layla had sent him that cedar leaf all those years ago. The city woke under a sky that felt too heavy for morning, clouds pressing low as if they'd been sent to muffle what was coming. Marcus hadn't slept. Neither had Hannah, judging by the way she stood in his office now, shoulders squared, eyes lit with something between fear and resolve. The cassette tape lay between them on the desk like a relic no one wanted to touch again. Yet both knew they would. Yusuf arrived without knocking, a folded map in his hand. It was the old kind, creases worn white, corners frayed. He spread it across the desk, revealing a narrow industrial district by the river. "This is where Layla worked before she disappeared," he said, "and where the aide will go tonight." "I've been watching." Marcus leaned over the map. The address circled in blue was an old freight warehouse, long abandoned in official records, but humming with new activity on satellite photos. You're sure? I'm sure enough to bet. My life, Yusuf replied, died by noon. They had a plan, risky, dangerous, but necessary. Marcus pulled every discreet string he had left. A retired security consultant, a sympathetic police contact, even Mr. Nolan, whose easy humor masked a talent for moving unnoticed through tight streets. They moved at dusk, slipping between crowds, heading home. The warehouse loomed against the river, its windows black and blind. Inside, the air smelled of oil and dust, but under that was something sharp, rank, fresh paper, and the faint burn of overheated electronics. Hannah was the first to hear voices. She motioned them toward a side stairwell that led to an upper mezzanine. From there, they saw everything. A long table stacked with binders, stacks of blank diplomatic papers, and men in suits bending over them with methodical precision. At the far end of the table stood the aide, sleeves rolled up, directing to others. Marcus's gaze caught on one binder. Even from here, he recognized the company logo, his own. Whatever they were building here wasn't just political. It was wired into his business, into contracts that had seemed clean, but now reeked of backroom deals. Hannah whispered, "They're forging agreements. They'll replace the originals." Before Marcus could answer, a new figure entered, a tall man with the kind of posture that told you he never worried about doors being opened for him. Omar, the very sheik who had shaken Marcus's hand in the boardroom 2 days ago. But here, there was no warmth in his expression, only the cool efficiency of someone inspecting his investments. Marcus felt the betrayal land like a punch, but Hannah didn't flinch. She pulled her phone, angled it for a photo. The soft click was almost lost in the hum of the printers. Almost. The aide's head snapped up. Shouts erupted. The room fractured into movement, men reaching for drawers, someone killing the lights. Yusuf grabbed Hannah's arm, pulling her toward the stairwell. But Marcus stayed rooted for one heartbeat too long. Eyes locked on Omar's. It was enough for the sheik to recognize him. They ran down the stairwell, through a side door, into the cold river air. Footsteps chased them, but Nolan's shuttle roared up from the shadows like a rescue in a war film. They piled in, the door slamming shut as Nolan threw the van into gear. In the back, Hannah's hand shook around her phone. "Got them," she said through shallow breaths. "Faces, documents, everything." Marcus met her gaze in the dim cabin. "This ends tonight," he said, voice steady even as adrenaline hammered through him. But in his gut, he knew the truth. This wasn't the end. It was the first time they truly stepped onto the same battlefield, and the war would not stay in the shadows for long.